I was 29 when this all started, and for the most part, I thought I had a pretty decent relationship with my family. My name's Anthony, and I've always been the one who kept his head down, worked hard, and stayed out of drama. I was the first in my family to graduate college, bought my own house before 30, and had a good job that I actually enjoyed. My younger sister, Melissa, was the opposite. Every crisis in her life somehow became a family emergency. Lost a job? The family had to pitch in. Got into credit card debt? Mom and Dad bailed her out. Wanted to go on a vacation she couldn't afford? She borrowed from the family account we all contributed to for emergencies, and of course, never paid it back. I tolerated it because it kept the peace. That was kind of my role in the family, the calm one, the fixer, the person who smoothed things over when Melissa and my parents went at each other. But it always left this bitter taste in my mouth, like my stability was being treated as a backup plan for everyone else's mistakes. The whole thing really started when I got promoted earlier this year. It was a big jump, better pay, more responsibility, and the chance to relocate to a different state. I was excited and honestly proud of myself. I'd worked hard for years to get to this point, and it finally felt like all those late nights and skipped vacations were worth it. When I told my parents, they congratulated me, but in this sort of distracted way, like they weren't really listening. And then, about a week later, I got that phone call from Melissa. She didn't even say hello, just launched right in. I lost my job, and you're going to have to help with my mortgage until I get back on my feet. I thought she was joking at first. I actually laughed, which was a mistake, because she got furious. This isn't funny, Anthony. I'm serious. You make way more than me, and I'm not losing my house because you're too selfish to help. I was quiet for a moment, because I could feel my blood pressure spiking. I asked her what happened to her savings, and she snapped that she didn't have any. When I asked why she thought I should be responsible, she said, "Because you're family. That's what family does." I told her flat out that I wasn't paying her mortgage. I couldn't even imagine what she was asking. That was thousands of dollars a month. It wasn't like she needed a short-term loan for groceries or a car repair. She wanted me to take on her bills indefinitely. She hung up on me. Not even an hour later, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my dad. "If you don't step up for your sister, you're out of the will." I stared at my phone for a long time. I didn't even know what to say. I hadn't asked for anything from them since I was 18. I'd paid for my own college, bought my own house, built my own career. And now I was being threatened with being cut out of the family because I didn't want to bankroll Melissa's choices. That night, I sat down at my computer and quietly removed my name from every joint account I had with my parents. The emergency fund, the old savings account we'd all chipped into when Grandma passed away, even the shared vacation cabin account that was supposed to be used for family getaways. If I was going to be treated like the villain, I wasn't going to leave my money sitting there for them to drain. By sunrise, I had 37 missed calls and a string of angry texts from every direction. My mom, my dad, Melissa, even my aunt. Some of them were guilt trips, family sticks together, Anthony. Some were threats, "You're going to regret this." And a few were just insults. I didn't respond to a single one. That was the first time I really let myself feel angry. Not just annoyed or frustrated, but genuinely, shaking mad angry. It wasn't just about the money. It was the entitlement, the assumption that I existed to solve Melissa's problems, the way my parents acted like I owed her my success. And for the first time in my life, I started to wonder what would happen if I stopped playing my role as the peacemaker. What if I stopped smoothing things over, stopped being the one to give in, stopped being the one who understood? The next family dinner was only a few days away, and I already knew I was going to show up. But this time, I wasn't going to stay quiet. And that's where things really started to get interesting. The family dinner was at my parents' house that Sunday, like always. Normally, I'd be looking forward to the food. My dad makes a mean roast. But this time, the thought of sitting across from Melissa after what she'd said to me made my stomach twist. I spent the drive over rehearsing what I'd say if she brought up the mortgage thing again. But when I got there, it wasn't just a normal dinner. It was an ambush. I walked in and instantly felt the shift in the air. Everyone was already seated, which was weird. Normally, dinner at my parents' house was more of a casual, come and go, help yourself thing. This time, it was like they were waiting for me. Melissa was sitting next to my mom, arms crossed, looking smug in that way she does when she thinks she's about to get what she wants. My dad cleared his throat when I came in, like I was late to some board meeting. "Anthony," he said, gesturing to the empty chair. Sit down. We need to talk as a family. I sat, but my guard was up. My mom wasted no time. Melissa's been under a lot of stress, and you laughing at her when she called you for help was completely inappropriate. I kept my voice calm. I didn't laugh at her losing her job. I laughed because she called me and told me I was going to pay her mortgage like it was an order. Melissa jumped in, her voice sharp. Because you should. You're the only one in this family who can afford it. That was the moment something in me hardened. No, Melissa. I can afford it because I work for it. And I'm not responsible for your mortgage. My dad leaned forward, his hands folded. Anthony, you have to understand, she's in a tough spot. Her house is all she has. If she loses it, she'll have nowhere to go. I almost laughed again, not because it was funny, but because the irony was suffocating. She has somewhere to go? She has this house. You've let her move back in before. But that's not really what this is about, is it? This is about the fact that for once, I'm not swooping in to clean up her mess, and nobody here likes it. Melissa's face turned red. You think you're better than me because you have some fancy job now? Because you bought a house and drive a nice car? You think that makes you special? That stung. Not because it was true, but because I could hear the jealousy dripping from her voice. I took a slow breath. No, Melissa, I don't think I'm better. I just think I'm tired of being treated like my hard work is some kind of community piggy bank. My mom sighed dramatically. Anthony, we've always helped each other in this family. When you were in school and needed help with rent. I cut her off. I never asked you for money. I worked 2 jobs. I slept in my car for a week one semester because I couldn't make rent, and I didn't ask you for a dime. That made them quiet for a moment, but only for a moment. Melissa sniffled, playing up the wounded little sister act. I just don't know why you hate me so much that you'd watch me lose my house. And that was it. That was the moment the entire script flipped for me. It wasn't that she was asking for help. It was that she was framing my refusal as some kind of cruelty, like I was actively choosing to destroy her life. I felt my jaw clench. You know what I think? I said, my voice low. I think you've gotten so used to everyone bending over backward for you that the second someone says no, you act like it's a personal attack. My dad stood up, his chair scraping the floor. That's enough, Anthony. But I wasn't done. No, it's not enough. You all told me I was out of the will if I didn't bail her out. Fine. If that's how you want to play it, then I don't want anything from you anyway. Keep your will. Keep everything. But don't you dare call me selfish for refusing to go broke over someone else's choices. The room went dead silent. My mom looked like I had slapped her. Melissa's eyes were wide, but there was this flicker of triumph there, like she'd finally exposed me as the bad guy. Dinner was awkward after that. No one said much, and I barely touched my food. I could feel all their eyes on me, like they were waiting for me to crack and apologize. But I didn't. When I left, my mom hugged me stiffly and said, "You'll understand someday." I got in my car and just sat there for a minute, gripping the steering wheel. I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Melissa had that look on her face, the one she got when she didn't get her way but was already scheming about how to make sure she would. And sure enough, the next week, I started getting calls from extended family. My aunt called to tell me that Melissa had been crying on the phone, saying she didn't know how she was going to survive because I abandoned her. My cousin texted me to say he heard I was refusing to help and that it was pretty cold. The narrative was spreading, and I was quickly becoming the villain of the family story. I tried to ignore it at first, but every time my phone buzzed with another judgmental message, I felt this slow burn in my chest. Then came the kicker. Melissa posted on Facebook about how some people would rather watch family lose everything than lend a helping hand, and how she was praying for strength during this difficult time. She didn't name me directly, but she didn't have to. Half the comments were from relatives and family friends, calling me selfish, saying money changes people, and one even suggested that I must have forgotten where I came from. That one hurt the most, because I hadn't forgotten. If anything, I remembered too well. I remembered every time I'd been told to be the bigger person when Melissa took my things without asking. I remembered when I had to skip a school trip because my parents used the savings account I'd been putting my summer job money into to bail her out of some mess. I remembered being told, over and over, that I was the responsible one, like it was some badge of honor, when really, it was just code for the one we can rely on to sacrifice. I realized then that this wasn't just about Melissa's mortgage. It was about years of being expected to give more, do more, be more, and never complain. The next family dinner was coming up, and I already knew what was waiting for me. The guilt trip, the confrontation, the attempts to make me cave. But this time, I wasn't just going to sit there and take it. And I had no idea that the confrontation I was about to walk into would push things past a point we could ever come back from. I showed up to the next family dinner with a knot in my stomach. The last dinner had been tense, but this time, I could tell before I even walked in that something was different. There were too many cars outside my parents' house. My aunt's SUV, my uncle's truck, even my grandmother's old sedan. It wasn't just a regular Sunday dinner. It looked like a summit meeting. When I stepped inside, I could hear voices from the dining room. Low, heated voices. My name was said more than once. I froze in the hallway for a second, listening. "He's being ridiculous," Melissa was saying. "He could pay off the whole mortgage tomorrow and still have money left over. He just doesn't want to help." My dad's voice came next, stern and authoritative. "He's always been stubborn. We just have to make him see reason." My mom added softly, "We can't let Melissa lose her house. It would be humiliating." Humiliating. Not tragic, not devastating. Humiliating. Like this was about their pride more than her roof. I stepped into the room, and conversation stopped dead. My grandmother was there too, sitting at the end of the table like a silent judge. She looked tired, disappointed, even, and my heart sank. My dad gestured to the chair again. "Sit down, Anthony. We need to settle this once and for all." I sat, my pulse loud in my ears. Melissa leaned forward, looking theatrical and pitiful all at once. "I tried everything," she said, like she was giving testimony in court. "I sold my jewelry. I canceled my gym membership. I even stopped ordering takeout. I'm doing my part. But if I don't make this month's payment, they're going to start foreclosure proceedings." She looked right at me. "Do you really want that on your conscience?" I stared at her for a long time. "Melissa, you've had months to get ahead of this. Why didn't you look for a roommate? Why didn't you talk to the bank about refinancing? Why is your first and only solution to call me and tell me it's my responsibility?" Her lip curled. "Because you're family, Anthony. You've always been the one with the good job, the nice things, the safety net. You're just going to sit there and let me lose everything while you go live your perfect little life somewhere else." I could feel the table turning against me. Every pair of eyes focused on me, waiting for me to say the magic words and fix it all. And then my dad dropped the bomb. "We've made a decision," he said, his voice clipped. "Your mother and I went to the bank this week. We took out a line of credit against the cabin property." My stomach dropped. "You what?" "To help Melissa," he said matter-of-factly. "To keep her from losing her home. It was the right thing to do." I gripped the edge of the table. The cabin property wasn't just theirs. It was supposed to be ours, mine, Melissa's, and my cousin Jake's, when they passed. It was the one piece of family legacy that hadn't been touched, the one thing we were all told we'd inherit equally someday. "You didn't even tell me," I said, my voice flat. Mom bristled. "We didn't need your permission. You've made it clear you don't care about this family's problems, so we did what we had to do." I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "So let me get this straight. You told me I was out of the will if I didn't help Melissa?" I said, "Fine. And your solution was to mortgage part of my inheritance anyway, so she could stay in a house she can't afford." Melissa crossed her arms, smug. "It's not your inheritance yet. And when I get back on my feet, I'll pay it back. Like you paid back the emergency fund." I shot back. "Like you paid back the car money from 2 years ago? Or the vacation account?" Her face went red, and I saw my dad's jaw tighten. "That's enough," he said. But it wasn't enough for me. "You went behind my back?" I said slowly, staring at them. "You used something that was supposed to belong to all of us to clean up her mess, and you didn't even bother to ask. You didn't even bother to tell me until it was already done." Grandma cleared her throat, her voice frail but firm. "He's right," she said quietly. "You should have asked him." That caused a ripple at the table, but my dad brushed it off. "We did what was necessary. If Anthony doesn't want to contribute, then we'll move forward without him." Something broke in me then, some last thread holding me to the idea that we were all on the same team. I looked at my sister, who had the audacity to look triumphant, like she had won something. I stood up slowly. "You know what?" I said, my voice steady. "You've made your choice. You've made it clear where I stand in this family. And I hear you, loud and clear." Mom's eyes narrowed. "Don't be dramatic, Anthony." I turned to her, my hands shaking, not from fear, but from how much I wanted to say everything I'd kept in for years. "Dramatic? You mortgaged part of the only thing that ever tied me to this family. And you didn't even hesitate. You've always bent over backward to make sure Melissa never feels the consequences of her actions. And you've always expected me to pick up the slack. Well, congratulations. You don't have to worry about that anymore. I walked out before they could respond. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel. Part of me wanted to drive straight home and never talk to any of them again. Another part of me, the part that had been stepped on, dismissed, and taken advantage of for years, was already thinking of ways to make sure they never did this to me again. By the time I drove away, my mind was racing. I wasn't just hurt. I was done. Done being the good son. Done being the backup plan. Done being quiet while Melissa got away with everything. And as I stared out at the empty highway, I realized something that made my pulse steady. I had more power than they thought. I had access to accounts, documents, even contacts that Melissa and my parents didn't. I knew things about the cabin property, about our family finances, that they'd probably forgotten I knew. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just thinking about defending myself. I was thinking about fighting back. And that thought, that tiny, sharp, electric thought, was the beginning of something much bigger. Because if they were going to treat me like the enemy, maybe it was time I stopped playing nice. Driving home that night, I felt like I was carrying a weight on my chest. It wasn't just anger anymore, it was grief. Grief for the family I thought I had, for the idea that somewhere deep down, we all had each other's backs. I realized that was just a story I'd been telling myself to make it easier to swallow all the small betrayals over the years. This wasn't just about money or a house. This was about trust, and that trust had just been broken in a way that couldn't be fixed with a phone call or a half-hearted apology. When I walked into my house, everything felt too quiet. My living room, usually a sanctuary, felt like a waiting room. I sat on the couch, staring at nothing, and for the first time in a long time, I let myself feel it all. The anger, the sadness, the exhaustion. I must have sat there for hours because at some point, my phone buzzed again. It was a group message from my parents, a long wall of text about how they hoped I'd cool off and come to my senses before I did something I'd regret. I didn't reply. A few minutes later, Melissa sent a separate text with a crying emoji and, "You really hurt me tonight. I don't know how you can live with yourself." I tossed my phone across the couch. I didn't trust myself to respond. That whole week, I kept my head down at work, but I wasn't really present. My coworkers probably thought I was just stressed about the promotion or the upcoming relocation, but the truth was, I was replaying that dinner over and over in my head. The looks on their faces, the smugness in Melissa's eyes, the way my dad said, "We did what was necessary," like that was the end of the discussion. One night, I went for a long walk around the neighborhood just to clear my head. The air was cool, quiet. I thought about how much of my life had been wrapped up in my family, not just holidays and birthdays, but even my decisions. How many times had I chosen to stay close because I didn't want to abandon them? How many times had I agreed to things I didn't want to do just to keep the peace? It hit me then. I wasn't just mad at them. I was mad at myself. Mad for being the dependable one for so long. For thinking that if I was just good enough, responsible enough, reliable enough, they'd treat me as an equal instead of a resource. I went home and dug out an old box from the closet, paperwork I hadn't looked at in years. Inside were copies of the family trust documents, tax forms, and even some of the old cabin property paperwork. I'd kept them when I helped my parents organize their estate planning a few years back. I sat there on the floor, flipping through page after page, remembering how I'd been the one to do most of the work back then, calling the lawyer, setting up the meetings, filing everything properly. And then I noticed something I'd forgotten about. My name was listed as co-trustee in case something happened to my parents. That meant I had certain rights, access to information, the ability to request records. The realization was like a spark in the dark. I wasn't ready to act on it yet, though. First, I had to sit with what had happened. I had to face the fact that I couldn't go back to how things were. The next Sunday, I skipped family dinner. My mom called, left a voicemail saying she hoped I was done sulking. My dad sent a curt text that just said, "We're disappointed in you." Melissa went further. She posted another Facebook update about toxic relatives and fake family. Mutual friends started messaging me, asking if everything was okay. It was humiliating. I stopped checking social media entirely. I muted the family group chat, and then I threw myself into work. If I was going to walk away from my family's expectations, I needed to fully commit to my own life. That meant preparing for the promotion and relocation like nothing else mattered. It was strangely freeing at first. I started working out again, something I hadn't done consistently in years. I stayed late at the office, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I made plans with friends I hadn't seen in months. Slowly, the heaviness started to lift. But then I got a letter in the mail from the bank, addressed to me because my name was still listed on one of the family accounts. It was a notice about the line of credit my parents had taken out against the cabin. I don't know what it was about holding that piece of paper in my hands, but something inside me snapped. This wasn't just about Melissa's mortgage anymore. This was about them putting our family's future on the line, my future, without even thinking twice. That night, I stayed up late, combing through the paperwork I'd pulled out earlier. I read every clause, every footnote. I started taking notes. It wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. It was about taking back some control. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Outwardly, I played it cool. When my mom called the next week, I answered politely, said work was busy. I didn't argue when she said Melissa was working so hard to get another job. I even agreed to stop by for dinner the following Sunday, just to smooth things over. But inside, I was already planning. I knew I couldn't undo what they had done, but I could make sure that from now on, they'd think twice before assuming they could use my name, my resources, or my future as a bargaining chip. And if I played this right, I could do it without ever raising my voice again. That was the strangest part of all, realizing that I didn't need to fight them head on. I could simply step back, let them feel the absence of everything I used to do for them, and let them deal with the fallout themselves. The night before that next dinner, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, and for the first time since this whole thing started, I felt calm. Calm, and a little dangerous. Because I knew that tomorrow, I wasn't just going back to sit at their table. I was going back to watch, to listen, to see just how far they were willing to push. And if they crossed the line again, well, I already knew exactly what I was going to do. By the time the next Sunday rolled around, something in me had shifted. I wasn't just bracing myself for another round of accusations. I was oddly curious to see what they'd try this time. Instead of dreading dinner, I treated it like a test. What could they possibly say that would hurt me more than what they'd already done? When I walked into my parents' house, the air was different. There was no dramatic silence, no glaring spotlight waiting for me. Everyone was talking in low tones, and Melissa was scrolling on her phone like nothing was wrong. Maybe they thought the last dinner had taught me a lesson. Maybe they thought I'd come crawling back, ready to make amends. I didn't give them that satisfaction. I smiled politely, sat down, and when my mom asked how work was going, I didn't downplay it. I told them about the big project I'd just wrapped, how my boss had praised me in front of the whole department, and how my relocation package had officially been finalized. Melissa looked up from her phone, eyebrows raised. So you're really moving? Yep, I said casually, spearing a piece of roast. End of next month. They're covering everything. Movers, temporary housing, even a car stipend. I said it lightly, but I watched her face carefully. There it was, that little twitch of her mouth, the one she gets when someone else has good news she can't compete with. Dad cleared his throat. That's good, son. But don't forget, you're still listed on some of these accounts and documents. We'll need to go over those before you leave. I smiled. Oh, I already took care of that. Pulled my name from everything weeks ago. The table went quiet. Melissa's fork clattered against her plate. You what? I shrugged, like it was nothing. Didn't seem fair to have my name tied up in things I don't have a say in. Figured it was simpler this way. My mom pursed her lips, but she didn't argue. I think she realized there wasn't much she could say without starting another fight in front of Grandma, who was silently sipping her tea like a queen presiding over court. That was the first night I left feeling good. Not just relieved, but satisfied. For once, I hadn't been dragged into defending myself. I'd simply stated a fact and let them sit with it. Over the next few weeks, my life started to take on this strange, exhilarating momentum. Work was thriving. My boss pulled me aside one morning and said he wanted me to lead an important presentation for a senior client. It was the kind of opportunity that could open even bigger doors for me down the line. I threw myself into preparation. Late nights at the office weren't draining anymore. They felt purposeful. I wasn't just working to stay afloat or to keep the peace at home. I was working for me. I also started getting my financial house in order. I met with a financial advisor, something I'd been putting off for years, and together we went through every account, every asset. By the time we were done, everything was clean, organized, and, most importantly, completely separate from my family's reach. There was something empowering about that process. Every form I signed, every account I moved, felt like cutting one more string that had been tying me down. Outside of work, I started reconnecting with friends. One Friday night, a buddy of mine from college invited me to a small get-together. I almost said no. My old habit was to keep my weekends clear just in case my family needed me. But then I caught myself. There was no just in case anymore. I went, and it was one of the best nights I'd had in years. We laughed until midnight, reminisced about stupid things we'd done in school, and by the end of the night, I realized how much I'd missed feeling like I belonged somewhere without strings attached. Meanwhile, Melissa's situation seemed to be getting worse. I wasn't asking questions, but word had a way of getting back to me through relatives. She hadn't found a new job yet, and apparently she'd missed another mortgage payment. I should have felt bad. A few months earlier, I probably would have. But now, instead of guilt, all I felt was this cold, steady clarity. This was exactly why I'd pulled away. One night, I got an email from the lawyer who'd helped my parents set up the trust years ago. He wanted to schedule a meeting to review the status of the cabin property, routine stuff, but since I was still listed as a backup trustee, he wanted my signature on a few documents before I moved. That meeting changed everything. Sitting in his office, I learned just how much leverage I still had. Because my parents had mortgaged the property after naming me co-trustee, they technically had to disclose every transaction to me for record keeping. That meant I had full visibility into what they'd done, the amounts, the terms, even the repayment schedule. I left the office with copies of everything, my mind buzzing. This wasn't about revenge, not yet, but it was about information. I suddenly understood just how deep they'd gone into debt to save Melissa's house. And I knew that if things kept going the way they were going to have to make some very hard choices soon. Back at work, my presentation went off without a hitch. The client loved it, and my boss took me out to lunch the next day to thank me personally. "I see big things for you in the next couple of years," he said. "Keep doing what you're doing." I smiled all the way back to my desk. That night, I opened a bottle of wine by myself and sat on the back porch, looking up at the stars. For the first time since this whole mess started, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not because my family approved, not because I'd earned their praise, but because I'd chosen it for myself. I was building something that was mine and mine alone. And quietly, in the back of my mind, I started to wonder what it would look like when they finally realized they couldn't control me anymore. Would they get angry? Would they beg? Would they try to manipulate me one last time? Whatever it was, I knew I'd be ready. Because now, I wasn't just surviving the storm. I was learning how to use it. The meeting with the lawyer had been a quiet turning point, but I didn't realize how much until I got home and spread all the paperwork across my kitchen table. I went through every page slowly, highlighting, making notes in the margins, cross-referencing dates and amounts with the copies of the old trust documents I still had. By the end of the night, I knew exactly how much debt my parents had taken on to save Melissa's house, and it wasn't a small number. They'd borrowed more than the remaining value of the cabin property. If they defaulted, the bank could technically force a sale of the cabin, which meant the one piece of our family's legacy that was supposed to be shared equally could be gone entirely. At first, I felt sick. Then, slowly, I started to feel something else: calm determination. This wasn't just about Melissa anymore. This was about the fact that they'd gambled with something that didn't just belong to them. And now, for the first time, I had all the information they probably assumed I didn't. I spent the next few weeks laying groundwork quietly, carefully. The first thing I did was schedule another meeting with the lawyer, this time, just the two of us. I asked him to walk me through exactly what my rights were as co-trustee and what my options were if I wanted to protect my share of the cabin's value. He was surprised at how thorough I wanted to be, but he explained everything. I could request a full accounting of the debt. I could insist on regular updates about payments. And if necessary, I could petition the court to protect my interest if I believed mismanagement was happening. That last part stuck with me. Mismanagement. I didn't say anything to my family yet. I kept showing up to Sunday dinners, kept smiling politely when my mom made little comments about how nice it must be to have money, kept nodding when Melissa gave dramatic updates about how hard it was to find a job in this economy. But privately, I was building a picture. I talked to the bank, under the pretense of needing information for estate planning, and confirmed the repayment schedule. They were already behind. If they missed one more payment, they'd be in default. Then, almost by accident, I discovered something else. A coworker of mine mentioned offhand that a branch of the company I worked for was opening an office not far from where my parents lived. Not just an office, a major branch, one that was going to be hiring aggressively for administrative, marketing, and support roles. I did some digging. Within a week, I had an email from HR confirming that job postings would go live soon. Good-paying roles, the kind of jobs that Melissa could absolutely apply for if she wanted to. I bookmarked the postings and printed them out. Not to hand to her, not yet. Because the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the best revenge wouldn't be some dramatic confrontation. It wouldn't be yelling or ultimatums. It would be quiet. It would be letting them walk themselves into a corner, letting them feel the pressure build until they were the ones who came to me. And when they did, I wouldn't be empty-handed. I started putting aside even more money, funneling part of every paycheck into a separate account. Not for Melissa, not for them, but for me, for whatever came next. One evening, I got a call from my grandmother. She didn't mention Melissa or the debt at first. She just asked how I was doing, how work was going, how the move was coming along. Then she got quiet and said, "You know, Anthony, I think you were right to stand your ground. Your parents love you, but they've let things get out of hand with your sister." It caught me off guard. She'd been so silent during all those dinners, I assumed she agreed with them. "I just hate seeing the family torn apart like this," she went on. "But you can't be the only one carrying the weight forever." I hope they realize that soon. That phone call lit a spark in me. If Grandma, the one person they all listened to, was quietly on my side, then maybe I wasn't as isolated as they wanted me to feel. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing cracks in their united front. My mom seemed more stressed at dinner, less quick to defend Melissa. My dad was quieter than usual, distracted. Melissa, meanwhile, was still posting cryptic updates online about fake family. But even some of her friends were starting to comment with not-so-subtle hints like, "Have you considered getting a roommate?" Or, "There are plenty of jobs out there if you really look." I didn't say a word, but I did make one more move. I emailed the lawyer again and asked him to draft a formal request for a full financial accounting of the trust. Nothing aggressive, nothing threatening, just an official document requiring my parents to provide proof of every transaction related to the cabin property loan. When I got the email back with a copy of the request, I sat back in my chair and stared at it for a long time. This was it, the first domino. Because I knew the second they opened that letter, they'd realize I wasn't just the stubborn son anymore. I was watching, and I wasn't going to let them gamble with my future again. The night before I sent the request, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee and thought about how far things had come. A few months ago, I'd been the peacekeeper, the one who always smoothed things over. Now, I wasn't smoothing anything over. I was setting the table, and I had a feeling the next family dinner was going to be one for the history books. When I finally mailed the formal request for a full financial accounting of the trust, I expected at least a day or two of silence before the fallout began. I was wrong. Less than 24 hours later, my dad called. His voice was tight, controlled, the voice he used when he was trying not to yell. "Anthony," he said, not even a hello first. "What is this letter we just got from the lawyer?" "It's a request for the trust's financial records," I said evenly. "Pretty standard. I'm co-trustee, so I have a right to see them." "You're making this into a legal matter," he snapped. "We're family." "I know we are," I said calmly. "And I'm not contesting anything. I just want to know exactly what was done with the property we all have a stake in." There was silence on the other end. I could almost picture him grinding his teeth. "You didn't have to go through a lawyer," he finally said. "Yes," I said softly, "I did." I could hear his breath catch, just a little. And that was the moment I realized he understood. I wasn't bluffing. The next Sunday, I showed up to dinner dressed in a crisp button-down shirt, clean-shaven, calm as ever. I didn't storm in. I didn't start with accusations. I greeted everyone politely, even Melissa, who looked like she'd swallowed a lemon when she saw me. Dinner was tense. My dad didn't say much. My mom kept giving me this worried look, and Melissa kept tapping her nails on the table like a drumbeat of irritation. Finally, halfway through the meal, my dad spoke. "We got your request. The paperwork's being prepared." I nodded. "Good." Melissa rolled her eyes. "This is so over the top, Anthony. You're acting like we stole from you or something. I set my fork down. You used a family asset without consulting everyone who had a stake in it. That's not theft, but it is mismanagement. Mom flinched at the word. Dad's jaw tightened. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I'm not here to fight. I continued. I'm here to make sure that from now on, there's transparency. Every dollar that goes in or out related to the cabin is going to be documented and shared. If payments are late, I'll know. If the bank threatens foreclosure, I'll know. And if I think things are heading in the wrong direction, I'll take steps to protect my share legally. Melissa scoffed. You drag your own parents to court? I looked her dead in the eye. If it meant protecting the one thing Grandma wanted us to have, yes. Her mouth snapped shut. There was a long silence. Finally, Grandma spoke up, her voice soft but steady. He's right. It was wrong not to tell him. This isn't just about you, Melissa. That felt like the first real win in months. I let the silence stretch a little longer before I leaned back and smiled, like we were just having a pleasant conversation. Oh, and I brought something for you, Melissa. Her eyes narrowed suspiciously as I reached into my bag and pulled out the printed job postings from my company's new branch. I slid them across the table to her. They're hiring locally. Good pay, good benefits. I even flagged a few roles you'd qualify for. Applications open this week. Her face went red. You think this is funny? Not at all, I said lightly. I think it's a solution. You get a job, you make your payments, and this stops being a family crisis. She shoved the papers back toward me. I'm not taking some hand-me-down job you picked out for me. I shrugged and tucked them back in my bag. That's your choice. But don't say nobody tried to help. And with that, I turned back to my plate and started eating again. The conversation moved on after that, or at least, they tried to move it on. But the dynamic in the room had changed. I wasn't cornered anymore. I wasn't the one defending myself. They were. Over the next few weeks, things got very quiet. I received the full accounting from the lawyer and went over it line by line. Sure enough, they were behind on payments, not by much, but enough that the bank was starting to add fees. I sent a polite, professional email to my parents. Thank you for providing this documentation. I would like updates every quarter going forward. Please confirm you are on a repayment plan and share details. It was cold, almost businesslike, and that was the point. I wanted them to feel that shift, that they could no longer expect me to just go along silently. A week later, I got an unexpected call from my mom. Anthony, she said softly, your father and I have been talking. We realize we should have told you what we were doing before we did it. I didn't rush to fill the silence. We're making the payments, she continued quickly. We don't want you to worry. I'm not worried, I said gently. I'm informed. That's the difference. She was quiet for a moment. Are you still coming to dinner this week? Yes, I said. But you should know, I won't be discussing finances at the table anymore. If there's anything to address, it can go through the lawyer. I could almost hear the relief and frustration mix in her exhale. All right. That Sunday, when I walked in, something was different. Melissa barely made eye contact with me. Dad nodded stiffly but didn't say anything about money. Dinner was almost peaceful. And then, just as we were finishing dessert, Grandma leaned over to me and whispered, I think they're starting to get it. I smiled, because I knew she was right. This wasn't just about getting even. This was about changing the entire way they dealt with me. And it was working. For the first time in years, I left that house without feeling drained. I felt in control. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more card to play. One last move that would make sure none of them ever tried to pull something like this again. And I was saving it for the perfect moment. 2 weeks later, the perfect moment I'd been waiting for arrived. It didn't come in the form of some grand family showdown. It came as a polite letter from the bank. The cabin properties line of credit had officially slipped into default. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the letter for a long time. This was it. The leverage point. The moment when my family's choices had finally run out of road. I could almost hear my dad's voice in my head saying, we did what was necessary. I took a deep breath, pulled out my laptop, and drafted an email to the lawyer. It was short and to the point. As co-trustee, I am requesting an emergency meeting to discuss protections for my share of the property. Please advise on steps necessary to prevent forced sale or further encumbrance of the asset without my consent. He responded within the hour, setting a meeting for the following week. I didn't tell my parents in advance. Instead, I showed up at the next Sunday dinner like everything was normal. Melissa looked unusually quiet, her phone face down on the table for once. My mom looked pale, tired. Dad tried to act as though everything was business as usual, but I could feel the tension radiating off him. Halfway through dinner, he cleared his throat. Anthony, I assume you saw the notice from the bank. I did, I said evenly. We're working on it, he said quickly. We just need a little more time to get the payments back on schedule. I nodded slowly. That's good to hear. But I think it's time we make some changes. Melissa frowned. What kind of changes? I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. As of next week, I'm petitioning the court to separate my share of the cabin property from the trust. It will no longer be tied to the line of credit you took out. Your debt, and any consequences of it, will be yours alone. Mom gasped softly. Dad's face went red. You can't just do that, he said sharply. Yes, I can, I said calmly. I've already spoken with the lawyer. It's within my rights. You used the property without consulting me. I'm making sure that can't happen again. Melissa slammed her fork down. So you're just going to leave us to deal with this by ourselves? I looked at her for a long moment, then said, very softly, yes. The silence that followed was deafening. You're really willing to burn this bridge? Dad asked finally. I shook my head. No. I'm willing to stop letting you set it on fire and expect me to put it out. Mom's eyes were shiny, but she didn't argue. I could tell she wanted to, but something in my tone, or maybe in the way I wasn't shouting, stopped her. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder, the job postings from the company's local branch, the repayment schedules, the notices from the bank, all neatly organized. I set the folder on the table. This is everything you need to fix this, I said. Melissa, those job postings are still open. You get a job, you make your payments, you keep your house. Dad, those bank forms include a forbearance application that would buy you 3 more months. I've done the legwork. Whether you use it or not is up to you. I stood up, picked up my jacket, and for the first time, I didn't feel that familiar weight on my chest as I walked toward the door. At the doorway, I turned back one last time. I love you, I said quietly, but I'm done sacrificing my future to save you from the consequences of your choices. If you want me in your lives, it has to be because you respect me, not because you expect me to fix everything. And then I left. I didn't look back. The next few weeks were strangely quiet. There were no angry texts, no late-night calls, no guilt trips. The lawyer confirmed that my petition had been filed successfully and my share of the cabin was now legally protected. One afternoon, I got a short message from my mom. We're making the payments. Thank you for the information. A week after that, I got a picture from Grandma. Melissa standing in front of a building in business casual clothes, smiling stiffly. First day at the new job, the caption read. I sat back in my chair and let out a slow breath. This wasn't the happy family reunion moment I might have wished for years ago, but it was something better, closure. They weren't going to treat me like the family safety net anymore. They weren't going to gamble with my future. And maybe, just maybe, they were starting to learn what it felt like to stand on their own 2 feet. A month later, on my last night in town before relocating, I drove out to the cabin by myself. The sun was setting over the lake, and for the first time in months, I felt at peace standing there. That place was safe now, mine, untouchable, because I'd fought for it. As I locked up and turned to go, I smiled to myself. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't leaving angry or guilty or weighed down by obligation. I was leaving free. And that, more than anything, felt like winning.